Hi, and welcome to All About the AP Calculus AB exam. We'll also be mentioning some topics for BC students as well if you haven't taken the AB exam. So first, let's talk about the format. The test has 4 sections. It takes about 4 hours, and for US students, it typically goes from about 8 a.m. to noon on the first Wednesday in May. The 4 sections involve 2 sections of multiple choice and 2 sections of free response. The multiple choice starts with no calculator for almost an hour, then switches to allow you a calculator. On those questions, typically about half of those questions will absolutely require a calculator, and half of them it might be helpful to look at a graph or do another function. The free response is 2 calculator questions and then 4 without. You have about 2 minutes per question for multiple choice and about 15 minutes per question for free response. The multiple choice tend to be quick questions that are one-liners asking things like a derivative, an antiderivative, equation of a tangent line, etc. While the free response are word problems that typically have 3 or 4 parts to them where you show your work. So unlike free response in other exams, like in English or history, you're not writing an essay in math, but you're merely showing your work and possibly writing a line or 2 of justification. So we'll talk about more about specific questions in a little bit. You do get breaks between all of these sections, so depending on your school policy or your testing center, you'll get a 3 to 5 minute break typically to stretch, to have some water, and a longer break between the multiple choice and free response. So the test is about 4 hours total, so that includes usually the beginning where you're bubbling name and details like that, the testing parts, the breaks. So it's a fairly long exam, probably one of the longest exams you've ever taken or will take. Although you get those breaks I mentioned, it again depends on your school policy if you can eat or do anything like that. Most schools usually have you put your calculator under your desk or at the front while you're not on the calculator sections. So again, about 15 minutes per free response and about 2 minutes per multiple choice. When you go to the test, you typically need to bring your photo ID, your pencils and erasers, always have some extras because pencils break, and your graphing calculator. We've used the TI-84 Plus in this class. That's allowed on the exam. So are other common TI models such as the 83, the 89, or the newer Nspire. Casio graphing calculators are also allowed, as well as a few other brands. What's not allowed for a graphing calculator is a smartphone app or an iPad app, because those have internet access and a lot of other resources attached to them. You cannot typically bring phones into the exam at all or anything with mobile access. Snacks and water allowed at some schools, not always at all schools or other places. Just check with your school and your AP coordinator for their policy. So the content of the exam involves a few things. So both the AB and BC classes are designed to prepare you for the AP exam. So we cover all of the topics that are on the test, some more than others, as well as a few additional topics. If you want to download the actual exam booklet, you can go ahead onto apcentral.collegeboard.com and download the specific list of topics. In general, you need to memorize all derivatives and antiderivatives, the rules, as well as the specific formulas. So for example, I would want to know the product and quotient rule and chain rule for derivatives. I would also want to know specific derivatives like those for sine and cosine and tangent. You also want to know the common trig values for special triangles. Typically those are only asked in the first quadrant or on the quadrant angles. So for instance, you might have to find the derivative of sine at pi or the derivative of cosine at pi over 3. You want to know some of the big theorems in calculus. These are used to justify different statements. And those are the intermediate value theorem, the extreme value theorem, and the mean value theorem. So those typically justify the existence of a point. So a question might be phrased such as, is there a point C in this interval? Explain why or why not. And you could say yes because of this theorem, or no because it doesn't fit this theorem. The fundamental theorem of calculus is the other big theorem in calculus, and that shows how antiderivatives and definite integrals for area are related. In AB, you want to know the material through Chapter 6, as well as 7.1 and 7.2, which come at the end of the course. Those cover differential equations, as well as area and volume applied problems. For BC, you want to get through Module 7. Module 8 is all review. So you'd want to cover through sequences and series, polar coordinates, and any of those additional applied problems we cover in Module 7. The scoring for all AP exams is given as a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. In general, 3, 4s, and 5s are considered passing grades and roughly equivalent to a C, a B, or an A if you had a 5 in college. Credit, though, varies quite a bit. From some institutions give credit only for 5s. Some institutions give credit only for the BC exam. Others will give AB credit for 3, 4, and 5. Sometimes they'll give you general credit, sometimes they'll give you specific credit, meaning some colleges may still require you to take their first math class, whereas other colleges will pass you out of their Calculus 1 or Calculus 2 requirement. For our actual test, the scoring goes as follows. Multiple choice questions are worth 1.2 points. And free response questions are worth 9 points. So both are half of your grade. And in the last 2 years, the policy changed to where there's no penalty for incorrect answers. So what that means is on the multiple choice, you want to answer every question. So depending on if you're a slow or fast test taker, if you don't get to the last few questions, you still want to bubble something in to receive some kind of credit. The questions on the exam tend to be of two types. The multiple choice will be fairly short questions. At the beginning of the multiple choice, you'll have easier questions that are very direct, such as find f prime or find the maximum on this graph. The end of the multiple choice will tend to have harder questions that you might have to have multiple steps to complete. The free response are usually multi-part word problems. The good news is that although these can be challenging, you can study them because they typically are drawn from the same areas. So there's almost always an area or volume question, a differential equation question, related rates, a motion question on position, velocity, acceleration, a problem involving data or graphs, and an applied max-min problem. So out of the 6 questions, they typically are drawn from these 7 areas. The multiple choice will be from all areas of the course. So you might have one question on arcsine, you might have a question on an inverse, you might have questions from early in the class such as a limit. So it'll be all over the place, not in any particular kind of order, except again, easier questions tend to be early on and harder questions tend to be later on. For the BC exam, in addition to these topics from AB, you'll also see free response questions, typically almost always on Taylor series or Maclaurin series, on polar area or arc length, and on vector motion, which would be position, velocity, acceleration, but with vectors. So 3 of the exam questions are identical to the AB exam from the free response, and 3 are new. And they're typically among these areas, or they're a harder version of one of these AB areas. The multiple choice is similar in that almost half of the multiple choice are from the AB exam of that year, while the other half or 2/3 are new new BC questions. So as you're preparing, it's always good to start early. So I suggest obviously completing our course helps quite a bit because you'll have covered all of the content. Second, use a test prep book. So typically the books that you see at the bookstores, so such as a Barnes & Noble or something, would have a good stock of several AB or BC books to choose from. And what those will do is allow you to practice a lot of multiple choice questions. So any of the major publishers tend to be fairly good because the AP Calculus exam has been around for so long. So Barron's, Princeton Review, 5 Steps, 2 of 5, Kaplan, all produce fairly good test prep books. You want one from 2012 or later because there were changes to the exam in 2012. So if you buy a used book online, just look for the date there. So that is going to be good practice for multiple choice questions. For the free response questions, you can actually use the real AP questions because they're available online. I'll show you that website in a minute. Next suggestion is just know what kind of test taker you are. If you tend to work slower, practice with a timer to kind of help you improve your pace and to reduce your nervousness. If you work too fast or if you work very quickly on tests, typically for you, you may need to slow down a little or go back and check your work. So practice doing that. And of course, work on your weaker areas. Sometimes we tend to only practice the questions that we feel good about and we avoid those weaker areas, but really try to identify what topics you don't know and try to work on those or meet with me to work on them. Last thing you can really do, and this is a huge thing I recommend everyone doing, is look at the AP rubrics that are available online so you understand how you get points. There are very specific things that you get points for and that don't matter. So for instance, whenever you have to do an integral, you get points for writing the correct limits on the integral on almost every integral type question on a free response. So that's an easy way to get a point. Even if you may not know the rest of the question, you can often get a few points early on by including some details like that. So this was last year's exam date. The exam date this year is Wednesday, May 7th. Let me just cross that out for us. There it is. Wednesday, May 7th is the exam date for this year. Again, it's usually at 8 o'clock for U.S. students. If you're outside of the continental U.S., it may start at a different time. You want to make sure you're already registered at your local school. The AP coordinator at every school is the person who handles the registration and other things, so your teachers should be able to tell you who that is. If you're homeschooled or can't register at your local school for any reason, you can go on AP Central and determine what other places are available. Typically, the local public schools will have a way for you to register for the test there. Our next few meetings will focus on specific AP questions from the free response. So we'll kind of dissect entire questions, and I'll be posting those online as well. So lastly, I just want to give you that resource I talked about for going to AP Central. So this is the teacher site. The student site also has a lot of information, but I find the teacher site has all the questions that you'll want to be looking for. So to get there, I'm going to put the URL up here and just show you how to navigate to get to it. So you want to go to apcentral.collegeboard.com, and that will take you to the main website. So we'll take a look right now at that. From here, on the left, it says AP Courses and Exams. I go to Course Homepages, and I choose AP Calc A, B, or BC. They're both set up identical. Okay, from here, they've hidden the free response questions. You want to go right here to AP Calculus AB Exam Information, or again BC if you're on the BC page. Okay, and from there, you'll scroll down.